Welcome to Midnight to 4 Entertainment. In the next 20 minutes, you'll learn about Midnight and its founder, best-selling author Dan Adrian. You'll be introduced to the amazing world of Galimar, the incredible body of artwork and video surrounding it, and what it took to create such an amazing story. Beyond that, though, you'll learn about Dan Adrian the man and the heart-rending story that led him to create such a remarkable and wonderful world. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare to be amazed.
Hello, and welcome to Midnight to 4 Entertainment. My name is Carrie-Ann Miranda. Today, we have the opportunity to meet with Dan Adrian, author of Galimar, Rise of the Quantum Traveler. Welcome, Dan, to our studios.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Dan, I've read through the book here and have had the opportunity to talk with several others who have read the book as well. The one thing I keep hearing over and over again is just, I can't put it down.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Now, I know that on the surface, it's generally known as a science fiction book, but if you were to describe to us what the book is all about, how would you do that from your perspective?
Well, as you said, the book is science fiction, but I would have to say that it is really much more than that because it delves into so many different parts of the human experience.
How is that?
Well, so to start out with, yes, it has a lot of science fiction in it, but it also has quite a lot of science fact as well. For instance, there's a part of the book where the characters in it are discussing how science fiction stories always have a device that allows for instant transportation of humans and other things through a transporter device. Then the characters in this book go on to discuss several existing and real technologies that might be employed to actually make it possible to do that in the real world.
You mean like the transporters in science fiction shows on TV or in science fiction movies?
Exactly. See, there are parts of the book that deal with real-world physics and science involved in technologies such as particle accelerators, radio telescopes, neutrino detection. In fact, the main characters of the book are themselves physicists. In writing the book, I strive to make their conversations both intelligent and humanistic at the same time.
Okay, so the book has real science in it, but that really isn't the focus of the book, though.
No, definitely not. In fact, the overall scheme of the book is it really only occupies a small part of it.
So what would you say is the main thrust of the book? What does Galimar really center on?
I would have to say that the main theme of Galimar is the universe of the mind and the odyssey of love, love lost, and love regained.
Tell me exactly what you mean by that.
Well, as I was writing Galimar, I really worked hard in making it the kind of book where when you were reading it, you could almost hear the sounds, smell the smells, see the sights, and feel the touches of the characters as they progressed through the story itself.
Okay, so you really tried to get the reader to project themselves into the story.
Right, but at the same time, I took great care to not spend so much time in describing the environment that you ended up losing the reader and you weren't really getting on with the real meat of the story itself.
Yeah, I've read books where, after a while, you kind of become bored with all the details and you lose interest in the overall direction of the story.
Right, exactly.
But as I said earlier, it appears that you were able to strike the balance with this, since the regular response from the readers is that they can't put it down.
That was the goal, yes.
So now, I assume that when it comes to write the book itself, you don't just start at chapter 1 and keep writing until the end, right?
No, that's quite right, yes.
So my next question has to do with preparation. What steps did you take to prepare for writing an epic novel like Galimar, Rise of the Quantum Traveler?
Well, aside from quite a lot of quiet contemplation on the storyline and the way the characters interacted with each other, I knew that for this to be a book filled with believable characters and believable science fiction, I needed to spend a lot of time thinking through not only the personalities of each character, but also the environments that each character found themselves in.
How many characters are in the book?
There's actually 59 characters.
Wow, that is a lot of characters.
Well, they aren't all central characters, and they all have different degrees of interaction with each other, and some of them have minor roles. However, I knew that for each character to be believable, I needed to flesh out the personalities of the characters, and the details of the worlds that they live in as much as possible. I needed to do that before I wrote one word in the mainline book.
Okay, so that makes sense. But how did you do that?
Well, before I wrote this book, I actually wrote another book that was never intended to be published. And I call this book the Universal Definitions Document. And it contains full biographies of every character, all the way down to how that character sounds, how they look, their favorite things in life are, what their temperament is, and what their background is. So.
Okay, wow. So what was the reason why you spent so much time on something that would never be published?
Well, imagine creating a scene where 3 or 4 of those characters are sitting at a table talking to each other like we are right now, and now introduce a situation that they have to deal with. Now, in real life, each person would bring to the table the sum total of their own life's experiences and their own personalities, and those experiences and base personalities would directly affect how they interact with each other, and would also directly affect how they would approach to solving whatever situation comes along.
So with clearly defining each character in the book, you could know how they would react to things in each other?
Exactly, that's right.
Okay. Now, earlier you alluded that this Universal Definitions document doesn't just have biographies in it. Is that true?
That's correct. It also has complete descriptions of each world in the book and each race as a whole. It outlines how those races came to be and what their general temperament is and what their governmental structure is, and an exhaustive description of any technologies that they happen to possess.
Wow, this sounds like a lot of work.
Well, it really was. It required me to really think through a lot of questions early on, but it was absolutely invaluable when it came time to actually hunker down and write the mainline book itself.
I can see that it would. Now, regarding the book itself, what can you tell me about the storyline? How is this book different from other science fiction novels out there?
I would have to say that to answer that, first, I think one way to describe it would be to describe what it isn't.
Okay.
You see, when you look at a lot of science fiction today, there are several movies and so forth in Hollywood that seems to center so much of the genre in the very dark and lurid and macabre storylines. It seems like Hollywood believes that the only way to say or to make a science fiction story today is if there are a lot of people dying and there's a bad guy in it that is so bad that you can't imagine anybody being worse.
And so you're saying that this isn't that type of story?
Well, definitely not. Galimar is different because even though there is a terrifying global situation that threatens continued existence of mankind, the book instead centers on a message of hope for the future and how important it is to maintain loving relationships with each other.
So are you saying that this book would probably appeal more toward women readers then?
I wouldn't say that either. I remember when I was going through the editing phase of the book, I purposely chose one editor who was a 64-year-old man who was more of a cowboy in his demeanor, really. And as he was reading through the book, I witnessed a panorama of emotions that went from laughing out loud to other times when he actually had to reach for the tissues to dry his eyes.
Oh, so the book should appeal to a lot of audiences then.
Yes, it does. I've had both male and female readers ranging from 18 all the way to 70 years of age. And I test marketed it not only in the US, but also in other countries, including Bulgaria, Colombia, Australia. And I consistently get that phrase that you mentioned earlier, that they just can't put it down.
Okay, now earlier you said that there were 2 ways to describe how this book is different. So what's the other way?
Yeah, well, the other way has to do with the story. One of the things you might have noticed in a lot of movies is that, and maybe even some of the big ones, is that it seems like the movie is lacking in the story department.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Like, there are a lot of special effects, but...
Exactly. It seems like these movies spend so much of their budget coming up with incredible special effects, but they've lost something along the way. And that is to realize that story is king. It seems like the focus is shifting from the plot to the effects. And when you do that, you really seem to lose the focus of the American movie experience.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can have incredible movies that will have an enduring effect on the moviegoer with little and sometimes even no special effects. Some good examples of that, I would have to say, would be movies like Princess Bride, Forrest Gump, and one of my personal favorites, Somewhere in Time.
So what you're saying is you can have minimal special effects, but if the story is amazing, then your audience will not only come, but they'll stay.
Right. Princess Bride or Somewhere in Time, for instance, has become so ingrained in the American movie-going experience that they've transcended into what some would refer to as a cult classic.
That's for sure. I remember watching those movies all my life. And every so often I just have to sit down and watch them again just to sort of relive the experience.
Right. And you see, it's that experience that can only be there if you have a story that is as strong as steel. With Galimar, the story is king. And it's so multifaceted and rich, I believe it will stand the test of time.
I can definitely see that. Now I'd like to switch gears a little and talk about you yourself for a bit. Before the show, we had a moment to talk a little about your personal life and how that played into the real creation of the story. And I'd like to draw you out a little more on that. Would that be okay?
Sure, that would be fine.
Okay. The paperback here is over 600 pages in length. So to start with, my first question along these lines is, how long did it take you to write this book?
Well, I first started writing the book in the autumn of 1996, so that would be about 20 years ago.
20 years? It seems like that's a pretty long time for a book to be written. Did it take that long to do all the research for it?
Not exactly. I mean, I did put a lot of effort into the research for the book to make sure that it was believable. But that wasn't the main reason for the book taking so long. The main reason had to do with my wife, Becky.
Really? So tell me how that's the case.
Well, Becky and I were married on December 6, 1986, in a small town at the time named Santa Maria, California. We were perfectly suited for each other. In fact, most of our friends referred to us as Romeo and Juliet.
Really?
Yeah, she was my everything. And the sun rose and set in my general direction in her eyes. We made plans to live a very long life with each other, and we were content to remain just the two of us for quite some time. To illustrate the kind of relationship we had, it was our custom that when it came time to go to sleep, we would snuggle up with each other in bed, and I would whisper in her ear that this was the best part of the day. And I would do that almost every night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Invariably, she would turn over and cuddle up under my wing and drift off to sleep. And I used to love to hear her breathe as she fell asleep.
It sounds like you had such an amazing relationship.
We really did. And all along, I would look forward to certain milestones, like our first anniversary, the 5th, and especially the 10th anniversary. And they represented how wonderful our relationship was.
I sensed that something may have happened, though.
Well, it did. That 10th anniversary was supposed to be a special one. We were going to be taking a special trip and doing something nice for each other. Unfortunately, I remember, as if it was yesterday, having to go visit her in the hospital instead. I remember looking on the whiteboard in the visitation area and reading that today was December 6, 1996, which was the day of our 10th anniversary.
Oh no, but what happened?
Well, unfortunately, she came down with several things, seemingly all at once. At the time, we had no idea what was going on, but ultimately the doctors diagnosed her with muscular dystrophy, thalassemia, diabetes, schizophrenia, and a form of Parkinson's disease.
Oh my gosh.
When I was visiting her that day, she was in the middle of what doctors referred to as a psychotic episode coupled with a catatonic reaction. They said that it was related to what we later found out was the schizophrenia. At the time, I didn't know what was happening. I was completely in the dark. And it wasn't until later that I found out that when she was looking at me on that occasion, she had no idea who I was.
Oh my gosh, Dan. I mean, how did you cope with that?
Well, I would have to say that the only way that I did that was by living life one day at a time, and sometimes even 1 minute at a time. She eventually got out of the hospital, but the effect of the whole episode had on her is that she basically walked into the hospital, but she came out in a wheelchair, and she never got out of that wheelchair.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So she never got out of the chair, but I mean, what happened next for her?
Well, beginning on that day, her overall health slowly decreased and got worse and worse, and she eventually had to live in a nursing home. I stayed by her side the whole time, but the new circumstances meant that I no longer had those best part of the day moments with her. So she went on to live in a nursing home for the next 18.5 years until eventually she passed away in my arms on August 19th, 2015.
Wow, Dan. I'm so sorry to hear about this.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Well, the whole reason I told you about all of this is because of your original question, why it took so long.
Well, I can only imagine that you didn't exactly have a lot of time to work on it during those, 18 or 19 years?
Well, pretty much. When she got sick, I decided to put the book on the shelf because, of course, taking care of Becky was much more important than writing a book. So it actually stayed on the shelf the whole time until about 2 or 3 months after she died.
Okay, so now it's 2 or 3 months after your beautiful wife passes away. So now what?
Well, as you can imagine, losing the love of my life was really hard on me, and I needed something to take up all the time that I now had after losing 2 very important people.
Wait, you just said you lost 2 very important people?
Yes, I did. Well, for the previous couple of months, or excuse me, years before losing Becky, I was living with my 90-year-old father, taking care of him. He was my best friend, really, and we had an amazing relationship. But only 3 weeks before I lost Becky, I lost him as well.
Oh my gosh. So you're telling me that within the span of 3 weeks, you not only lost the love of your life, but you also lost your best friend and father as well.
That's right.
What did you do?
Well, my family came to my rescue and cradled my shattered heart for the time being, but after a few months, I needed something to keep me company at those times when I was alone. And that's when I took out this 20-year-old project, this 20-year-old book, and I blew the dust off of it and proceeded to complete the book.
Wow. So how long did it take you to complete the whole writing of the thing?
Well, I remember observing that on December 24th, 2015, there was 24,000 words written so far.
Wow.
And most of that was that universal definitions document I told you about before. Mm-hmm. I then proceeded to finish the definitions document and then write the book itself over the next 6 months, bringing the total number of words written to about 238,000 words.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for sharing a story with us that is no doubt hard for you to relate.
You're welcome.
Well, after that, I really have only one more question for you, and that has to do with the future. What's next?
Well, Rise of the Quantum Traveler is actually only the first of a trilogy. Aside from working on preparations for making Quantum Traveler into a film, I'm also currently writing the second installment of the story. And it has some incredible developments that will really amaze the readers.
That's fantastic to hear, Dan. I really look forward to hearing when that is released. Thanks for coming into the studio and sharing such an amazing story with us today.
Well, you're welcome. It was a pleasure being here.
Once again, this was an interview with Dan Adrian, author of Galimar, Rise of the Quantum Traveler, available now on Amazon or at your favorite bookseller. I'm Carrie Ann Miranda. Thanks for coming.